Good evening. My name is Erica Baker. I am from Aspen University, and my class is Creating Strategic Change That Lasts. My topic for this class is Sources of Power in an Assisted Living Facility. Power is a key and inseparable aspect of any social group, including an organization. I am going to discuss the 5 sources of power and describe and explain to you about the sources of power. Then I will analyze my own workplace, which is an assisted living facility, and discuss which source of power I believe is most dominant. Finally, I look at the alpha dog concept as described in our textbook, leading the high energy culture, what the best CEOs do to create an atmosphere where employees can flourish. And I will explain what it means while also applying it to my workplace. There are 5 sources of power that management theory identifies. They include legitimate power, reward power, expert power, referent power, and coercive power. While these different forms of power are distinguishable, they are not mutually exclusive either. A given leader or organization may use several forms, although one form is likely to dominate above all others. Legitimate power. Legitimate power is a power that someone has by virtue of being in a position of authority. We might think of legitimate power as official power. Examples of people with legitimate power include your presidents, your CEOs, your managers, and so on. In their respective organizations, people who occupy these offices have certain rights, privileges, and powers that are possessed simply by virtue of their position. Having legitimate power does not necessarily mean that one has influence. Many people have probably worked for managers whom they found uninspiring and whose policies they did not want to follow. Maybe they just actually didn't. In certain cases, legitimate power can be a negative thing, especially if those who are supposed to follow the person in legitimate power regard their legitimate power as unearned. On the other hand, since legitimate power often coincides with other types of power, someone in legitimate power might be able to win influence by coercing their followers. But those are still different types of power. Legitimate power all by itself tells us little about whether or not someone is an effective leader. Reward power. In reward power, as the name implies, reward power involves rewarding others for their work. People in legitimate power often use reward power as a way to buy influence. Bonuses, pay raises, or even ancillary rewards are all examples of reward power in action. The basic mechanism of reward power is that someone promises a positive consequence to someone else in exchange for a certain level or type of performance. Reward power does not necessarily depend on legitimate power. Peers can reward each other in certain ways too, by praise, compliments, and etc. This is important to keep in mind because leaders and managers are not always the same people. Expert power. Expert power is a power wielded under having a certain knowledge or skill that is valuable within the organization. An SME, subject matter expert, is an excellent example of someone who has expert power. Individuals who have expertise can use their expertise implicitly or explicitly as a bargaining chip. Expert power can be a dangerous power too at times. This is because knowledge needs to be shared in an organization. Individuals who have expert power should be careful not to exploit their expert power because this can lead to hostility between individuals and ultimately to the organization being harmed if those with expert knowledge are keeping it rather than sharing it with others. Like reward power, expert power can exist in a person whether or not they have legitimate power. Managers might use it, for example, by claiming expertise about what is best for the organization due to their higher position, but it might also be used by non-managers. Referent power. Referent power is essentially the power of likability. Someone who has referent power is able to influence others just by being someone whom others want to please for sociable, relational reasons rather than out of fear or compulsion. Referent power is a very important power in an organization because its basis is rooted more in trust and other intangible, intrinsically motivating factors. Ideally, people with legitimate power will have referent power, but this isn't necessarily the case. Referent power can theoretically exist anywhere in the organization. Anytime someone does something because they want to please someone else, again, not out of fear but genuine likability, it is referent power that is pulling the motivational weight. Coercive power. Finally, we have coercive power. Coercive power, like reward power, is often a tool used by people who have legitimate power. Expert, except while reward power is about promising positive consequences in exchange for a type of performance, coercive power is the threat of a negative consequence. Coercive power, like expert power, is something that members of an organization should be careful not to abuse. It does not have a legitimate place. No one is perfect, and employees who are obstinate in poor performance or whatever else may indeed need the threat of coercive power to help start taking things more seriously. But if an organization runs on coercive power, it is likely to develop a hostile, tense, and toxic culture. Although coercive power goes along mostly easily with people who have legitimate power, since they have a legitimate power, fire, penalize, demote. It can exist in people who do not have legitimate power. And in that form, it is usually destructive. Employees who coerce their peers by being cold, nasty, giving bad looks, gossiping, etc., as retribution for a perceived wrong would be using coercive power. Dominant source of power at my workplace in assisted living facility. I would say that expert power is the most dominant source of power at my workplace. I work in an assisted living facility, so it is in the healthcare field. As such, it is an environment where certain types of expertise carry a lot of currency. Not just anyone can work in this environment. There are certain standards of education, not to mention skills, in order for individuals to be a part of the organization. The use of expert power in my situation often goes along with legitimate power. In particular, policies at my workplace are usually set at the executive or managerial level rather than involving much input from people who work the front lines. And they are designed in this way on the grounds of compliance, regulation, and etc., all of which managers claim they understand best. So, when policies are implemented that frontline workers might find difficult to follow or work with, the typical response is that it has to be this way, that the compliance committee has thoroughly vetted the situation and discovered this to be the best possible policy. In other words, any pushback or concern about policy is resolved by simply appealing to expert authority, especially of individuals who have legitimate power. In truth, though, this type of power is not all that sustainable. Medical leadership authors argue that referent power is really the most important source of power in healthcare organization. This is because referent power is the most accommodatable form of power. It succeeds in unifying a workforce, and that it's very important in a healthcare team because the health and safety of our patients are at stake, and personal needs to feel like they are all working on the same team and toward the same goal. Autocratic or otherwise expertly imposed policies tend to alienate others. When healthcare workers feel like they have no claim over how their workplace actually works, they begin to feel unempowered and lose motivation. This is true outside of healthcare context as well, but it is especially a problem in a healthcare context where the worker engagement has a direct effect in patient health or on patient health. Referent power is a good way to avoid that my way or the highway attitude that leads to workers feeling disengaged and unempowered. Alpha dog concept. The textbook explains all organizations have alpha dogs. An alpha dog can be distinguished as someone who is in a position of authority and most credible in those who drive consistently high value performance. Alpha dogs are an especially important figure in an organization because they tend to encapsulate the organization's values, behaviors, and culture. By looking to an alpha dog, employees get key clues about the organization's truths. There is at least one manager at one manager at my workplace who I would consider an alpha dog. This person is clear about their own personal truth, and they consciously and courageously act on them. I have noticed that she is always very confident in what she does and just as confident leading others to follow her. People do not typically show confidence in things about which they are uncertain of. So I take that confidence as a sign that she knows what she's doing and has no qualms or apprehensions about doing it. Thank you. Again, my name is Erica Baker. You will find the references on the next page. Goodbye.